I decided to catch a late-night movie screening to relax, something quiet, away from the noise and stress of everyday life. As I entered the dark theater, I immediately noticed something strange. All the seats were empty except for one that had a coat draped over the backrest. It was a dark brown coat, worn at the sleeves, as if it had been used for years. I figured someone might have reserved the seat and chose a row further back, trying not to make too much of it. After all, it was just an odd detail on what seemed like a normal night. But as the movie started, I realized the coat was still there, alone, with no one showing up to take the seat. It made me uneasy, but I thought maybe it was just paranoia or exhaustion. During the intermission, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to get closer to check it out. The coat looked old but well maintained, and something in the pocket caught my attention. There was a strange lump inside. I hesitantly touched the fabric and found a cell phone in the outer pocket. The screen was locked, but a notification was visible, faintly illuminating the dim room, meeting scheduled for midnight tonight. My heart raced as I tried to process what that meant. Who would leave a coat and a cell phone behind? And why did the message feel so deliberate? Before I could think about examining the device further, I heard footsteps echoing down the aisle. I quickly returned to my seat, pretending nothing had happened, but I knew something wasn't right. The footsteps I heard weren't from a theater employee or another moviegoer, at least, they didn't seem to be. They were slow, calculated, as if whoever was there was searching for something, or someone. I stayed frozen in my seat, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. When I glanced back at the coat, I noticed it was exactly as before, but something had changed. The cell phone was no longer visible in the pocket. My heart sped up even more as I tried to figure out what had happened. Had I imagined everything? Or had someone taken the device while I returned to my seat? There was no one else in the room besides me, at least, no one I could see. Hours later, when I got home and turned on the TV to catch the news, I felt my blood run cold. A local report showed the image of a man found dead in an alley near the theater. He was wearing a dark brown coat, worn at the sleeves, exactly like the one I'd seen in the screening room. The reporter mentioned the crime had occurred around midnight, and the police were still searching for clues about the motive and those responsible. As I watched the broadcast, I realized the image of the coat on the screen was identical to the one I'd touched, even down to the small tear near the collar. This couldn't be a coincidence. Now, all I can think about is that maybe I was closer than I should have been to something very dangerous. Since that night, I can't get the image of the coat and the cell phone out of my head. Every time I close my eyes, I see the notification glowing on the screen, meeting scheduled for midnight tonight, like an implicit sentence. Worse still, I know I might have been a witness to something crucial without even realizing it. I tried calling the police to tell them what I saw, but I stopped before dialing the number. What would I say? That I touched an abandoned coat in an empty theater and found a cell phone with a strange message? It sounded crazy, even to me. But the truth is, I know it was important, and that I might have missed the chance to stop something terrible. The next day, I went back to the theater to try to understand what had happened. The room where I'd been was closed for maintenance, and the staff seemed evasive when I asked about the incident. However, one of them let slip something disturbing: that room has been giving people trouble lately. They say they feel presences in there. He chuckled softly, as if trying to lighten the weight of his own words, but his nervous glance told me everything I needed to know. Now, every unusual sound makes my body stiffen, and I feel like I'm being watched by invisible eyes. Whoever left that coat and that cell phone, they knew I'd be there. And now, I don't know if I'm safe. Since then, my routine has completely changed. I avoid going near the theater or any place that reminds me of that night. But the feeling of being watched hasn't gone away. Sometimes, when I come home late, I think I hear footsteps behind me, slow and steady, like the ones that echoed down the aisle of the dark room. I look back, but there's never anyone there. However, last night, I found something that chilled me to the bone. When I got home, I noticed a strange object on my table. It was an old cell phone, with a cracked screen and powered off. I swear it hadn't been there before. When I finally turned it on, there was only one notification on the screen: "You've been invited to the next meeting." Now, I know what happened at the theater wasn't a coincidence. Somehow, I was chosen, maybe for touching that coat or messing with the wrong cell phone. Whatever the reason, I'm marked. I try to convince myself that I can ignore all of this, that it's just paranoia or some kind of cruel prank. But deep down, I know the truth: whoever is behind this knows exactly where to find me. And if I don't figure out what they want before the next midnight, I might end up like the man in the alley, wearing a coat that isn't mine. I was closing up the movie theater after the last showing when I heard footsteps echoing down the hallways. I stopped for a moment, trying to figure out where they were coming from. It immediately struck me as strange. I knew I was the only employee there that night, and all the customers had already left. Still, the footsteps were clear, as if someone were slowly walking through the empty space. I followed the sound to the maintenance room, a rarely used area located at the back of the building. When I opened the door, I found something I didn't expect: a heavy metal box with a handwritten label in thick, uneven letters that read, "Private property, do not open." My heart raced as I wondered who could have left it there, and why. Curious, I decided to open the box, even though I knew I probably shouldn't have. Inside, I found rolls of old film reels and a worn-out notebook filled with detailed notes about employee schedules, frequent customer names, and meticulous descriptions of the theater's daily routines. There were even rudimentary maps of the hallways and emergency exits, marked in red to highlight strategic points. Each page seemed to be part of some kind of meticulous planning. Before I could examine it further, I heard muffled voices coming from the hallway. I froze, trying to decide what to do. When I peeked outside the room, I saw two men dressed as delivery workers carrying bulky black bags. One of them noticed me and gave a disturbing smile, saying only, "You shouldn't be here." That phrase echoed in my mind like a direct warning. You shouldn't be here. Who were those men? And why did they seem so calm when they saw me? Before I could react or say anything, they disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind only the distant sound of their footsteps. I returned to the maintenance room, trying to process what I had found. The metal box and its contents were clearly part of something bigger, something dangerous. But what? The notes in the notebook seemed like surveillance details, as if someone had been monitoring every move inside the theater. As I flipped through the pages again, I noticed something even more disturbing. My name was there, with observations about my work hours and nightly routines. Days later, I learned from local news that the theater had been used as a meeting point by a criminal group involved in planning kidnappings. The police found evidence that the location was strategic for monitoring targets and coordinating operations. When I read that, a chill ran down my spine. That metal box, those notes, it all made sense now. But I also knew that by opening the box and handling the notebook, I had probably drawn attention to myself. Now, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, and that I might have stumbled into something far bigger than I could have imagined. Since that night, my life has completely changed. Every unusual sound makes me jump, and every shadow seems to hide the faces of those men I encountered in the hallway. I tried telling the police about the box and the notebook, but when I returned to the theater with investigators, the maintenance room was empty, as if nothing had ever been there. "Are you sure you saw this?" one of the officers asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. There was no way to prove I wasn't making it all up. They found other traces of the criminal group in other parts of the building, but nothing directly connected to what I had seen. I left frustrated, knowing no one would believe me without concrete evidence. To make matters worse, I've started noticing small signs that I'm being watched. Sometimes, I find strange marks on my apartment door, as if someone had tried to force it while I was out. Other times, I see unfamiliar cars parked near my building, always with the same occupants inside, faces I can't quite see clearly but somehow feel familiar. Whoever these people are, they know who I am and what I did that night. And now, I know that opening that box was only the beginning. Whatever they're planning, I fear I might be their next target. These days, I live in constant alert. I don't know if I'm safe at home or at work, and the feeling that something is about to happen consumes me. I tried quitting my job at the theater, but my resignation was denied, scheduling issues, they said. Now, every time I enter the building, it feels like the walls are closing in on me, watching my every move. The notes from the notebook keep haunting me, especially the ones detailing my daily routines. It's as if someone is still studying me, waiting for the right moment to act. Yesterday, when I got home, I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message, "You know too much." There was no signature, no sender, just those 3 words that confirmed all my fears. Whoever is behind this isn't just going to give up. And now, I know my only chance is to figure out who they are before it's too late. But as I try to piece together this terrifying puzzle, I can't help but think, maybe I've already made the mistake that will put me directly in their hands. I always thought movie theaters were perfect places to disappear. Dark, isolated, and full of corners no one pays attention to. That night, I chose the last showing, a nearly empty theater playing an old movie that barely caught anyone's notice. I knew it would be easy. She walked in just before the film started. A young woman, alone, wearing a red coat that made her stand out in the dim light. She seemed distracted, absorbed in her phone as she made her way to her row. I don't know why I chose her specifically. Maybe it was the way she seemed so confident, like she wasn't afraid to be there alone at that hour. It irritated me. I sat a few rows behind her, carefully observing her movements. She took off her shoes, crossed her legs, and settled in to watch the movie. Everything was going according to plan. When the lights went out completely and the first scenes began to roll, I stood up slowly and walked over to her row. No one noticed. No one ever does. I knelt beside her seat and pressed a chloroform-soaked cloth against her nose before she could react. She tried to resist, but it was useless. In seconds, she was unconscious. Now came the riskiest part, getting her out without drawing attention. I wrapped her body in a blanket I'd brought along, pretending it was just someone carrying a pile of clothes or something similar. I calmly walked toward the side exit, passing through the dark hallway that led to the back of the theater. I knew there was a service door used by employees, I had explored it during previous visits. It was perfect for my plan. When I finally placed her in the car, I felt a strange sensation, not guilt, but a kind of emptiness. As if this was less satisfying than I had expected. But there was no turning back now. I drove to the location I had prepared, an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. There, she would wake up and understand why all of this had happened. She screamed when she realized where she was. She screamed a lot. But after a while, her words began to change. She stopped begging for freedom and started speaking directly to me, about me. About how pathetic I was, about how I was afraid of the world and the people around me. Every word she said felt like a knife cutting into my skin. I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't let her keep talking. In the end, I did what needed to be done. I cleaned everything meticulously, as I always do. I returned to the theater days later, as if nothing had happened. But something changed. Now, every time I enter that theater, I feel eyes watching me in the darkness. And sometimes, when I'm alone at home, I hear her voice again, whispering in my ear, reminding me of who I really am. Her words echo in my mind, even when I try to ignore them. She knew something about me that I never wanted to admit. And now, I can't escape that truth. Maybe I made a mistake choosing her. Maybe she was more than she seemed. Or maybe I'm just not ready to accept what I've done. Either way, I know that night at the theater marked the beginning of something that hasn't ended yet. And every time I go back to that place, I feel like I'm being watched, not just by her, but by something bigger, something I still don't understand.